Welcome to the Church and State Auxiliary, a podcast where we review people, their beliefs, and how it affects their politics. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and not a reflection of any company or organization or group. We invite you to listen, to ask questions, and follow along. So I would encourage everyone that when you find yourself in those type of conversations to not just get irritated or mad and then resort to what we have now become in society, and it's acceptable, where if I don't understand what you're saying or I disagree with what you're saying and I can't come up with an argument against it, like my dad just pointed out, it makes you feel vulnerable. And when you feel vulnerable, your natural response is your defenses go up. Normally you get mad, you can get scared, and out of that response, your natural instinct is to resort to some type of flight or fight instinct. Now,
That's true.
yeah. And now our fight instinct is looking more, you hear it, people begin name calling, or one thing that I've seen by my personal experience is kind of a dehumanization. And what I mean by that is reducing them to saying, well, they're just crazy, right? This is just insane what they're saying.
Or we label, right? We've become really good at labeling people. It's from my point of view, it's an extension of the straw man argument, where we set up a straw man. Back when we taught debate, you set up a straw man, you attack this, you equate someone to the straw man, you destroy the straw man, and then by extension, you destroy the person. We've done that today with labels, whether it's uh, liberal or
Conservative.
conservative or uh, left wing or right wing, and then you can add labels such as extremist, or we can go to labels, Nazis or fascist or anti-fascist or
Sexist, racist, all the terms that we love. They just fling around now.
they fling around and they've been redefined so many times that I know when I'm listening to the conversation, I don't even know what the person means because someone may look at me and say, well, you are and then attach a label to me. And I fundamentally have none of the qualities that I would define that label with, but somehow they don't even know me, but they have found something in that 30-second conversation that we've had to label me with. And we could be talking about the weather, and all of a sudden I have a label affixed to me, and because that label is evil, I am therefore evil,
Evil.
and
Right.
therefore I have no validity. My conversation has no validity.
Right.
My argument has no validity. The points that I'm making, and this idea of labeling has become the way of saying your opinion has no value.
Right.
So
And the scary conclusion to that process is as I add more labels to you, I reduce the fact that you're actually a human being and that you might have thought about this, or um, that you have certain rights or inalienable rights. And so when I remove all that and I replace it with labeling and anger, then I think we see a rise in political violence, right? Because no one, and like, I want to reiterate the point because I think it's important. We Just because I'm having a conversation does not mean I'm compromising myself. It does not mean that I'm giving over to the other side. And I think it's so sad that our conversations, if I sit down and have a conversation, us being Christians, if I sit down and have a conversation with a non believer, well, that's compromising with them. And if they don't agree with me, then I can resort to name calling or irritation or anger, and I can respond in that anger and however I want to because that's okay. And it's a very bad path that we are following down. And statistically, it's proven that political violence and even religious violence, there's a lot of school shootings that are now happening at schools run by churches. There has been more church violence on the rise.
So the amount of violence occurring to these moral institutions is on a sharp increase because no longer is there conversation, no longer is there communication. It is, I'm going to label you. Once I've labeled you, I've now removed your humanity, and that gives me the right to do a heinous act against you. And that is what we are seeing in society. And I want to stop that, right? If I do nothing else out of this podcast, I want to tell everyone this is not the right course of action. In order to have a civil society, it does require that I learn and I study. George Washington, I got to tour his house in Mount Vernon, and one of the most prominent features in the entire house is the library. Okay. He was a very well studied individual.
He was.
A lot of our founding fathers were very well studied, right? Reading volume after volume after volume. They weren't basically, mindlessly scrolling, watching a 30-second clip on a debate, hearing something that creates irritation, or they hear how this winning argument was done, and if you agree with it, that's great. If you disagree with it, it makes you mad. And so you scroll and you scroll and you keep getting these little 15 to 30-second blips of how this argument has been debunked or this has been debunked, and it's not really an in-depth study at all. And it gives you these little 15-second blips to parrot and incorporate into the rest of your life. And it's a huge disservice because in order to be an intellectually functioning person, it requires quite a bit of study.
I think so. I think that, and going back to what I was saying earlier, when I would get angry at the NPR, broadcast on the public broadcasting stations, it would take time. And that was back before, you could just Google something. So you actually had to go out and find books and find articles and actually read uh, about what they were talking about. And it does take effort. And in today's quick changing society, it even takes more effort and more energy to actually accumulate the knowledge that you need if you're going to be involved in the socio-political environment. Now, not everyone's going to be involved in that, and not everyone is qualified to be in that socio-political environment. I have commented numerous times that you may listen to a Christian person who's taking a stand, and I have other Christian friends that would say, "Oh, isn't that great that this person is taking a public stand?" And my response would be, "No, it's not, because this person, although they want to take a stand, they are not they're not prepared.
Right.
They're ill prepared. They actually are walking
They're
into a
going right.
minefield,
Right.
in tennis shoes.
Yes.
And they're not prepared to be there, and they do a disservice by not being informed to the entire Christian community.
Yes.
And I would extend that to the entire socio-political environment. They do a disservice by
Yeah.
being there. Desire to be in the spotlight does not equal ability
Qualification.
and qualification to be in the spotlight, and to be in that socio-political environment today. I'm advocating that if you want to be an impact player, be informed.
Right. I totally agree. So sadly, I wish I could give better advice or instruction, but I think it's tried and true, and it works really well. Is simply, if you want to start having these conversations, you want to start facilitating change, you have to, number one, you have to do a lot of work and study. Okay. And it's not just listening to whatever news outlet strokes your beliefs the most. It's about expanding your viewpoint and reading even information that you don't agree with. You learn it, you understand it, you stop parroting what everyone else is coming up with, what everyone else is saying. You start thinking for yourself, you start reading and studying, which again is hard work and it's dedication. Once you have done that, as you have read and as you've studied, then you gain the ability to wade into these very challenging conversations. But you can facilitate change instead of getting everyone riled up and mad at you.
Right, and a good
I
example.
mean, you'll still have some, but hopefully
reduces.
and like you said, you increase that 20% of or what is it, 80% of non-belief. You maybe decrease that number and maybe it's a 50-50.
Maybe it's a 50-50.
Yeah.
You know, one of the great, maybe an example, and this has happened in the previous parts of our lives, but you know, we might be having a conversation with someone who claimed to be a Calvinist, and you know, they would say, "Oh, I'm a Calvinist," and you would say, "Have you read the works of John Calvin?"
Right.
And they would say, "Well, no." So how can you be a Calvinist if you've never read the works of Calvin? Uh, and by the same uh, metric, I have had discussions with humanists, and I would ask them. I said, have you read the Humanist Manifesto?" And in many cases, the response is, "What is the Humanist Manifesto?"
Right.
And it's like, okay, you are claiming to be a humanist,
Right.
but you've never read your creed
Right.
as a humanist, the Humanist Manifesto. You've never read that, yet you're claiming to be one.
Correct.
And then you start quoting, because I've read the Humanist Manifesto several times, and so you start quoting parts of the Humanist Manifesto to them, and they go, "Well, I didn't know that was in there."
Right.
It's like, okay, you're claiming to be this,
Right.
but you don't actually believe
Right.
what your doctrine would say as a humanist.
Correct.
And
And it happens in so many different realms that I don't think people, again, I think people are just really lazy as far as what they want to. It's hard to learn,
Mm.
okay? And I was reading an interesting article about the psychology of learning, and in the article it talks about the only way that you learn is you have an initial time period when you start learning where you feel stupid and you feel vulnerable. And our day in society, that is not something that's cherished by any stretch of the imagination. And so people stop learning, right? It's much easier to flip open your phone and they tell you exactly what to believe.
right,
And I agree with you about the Humanist Manifesto or Darwinism or uh, what do they call it? Not relativity. That's
relativism.
relativism or all those different types of isms. Many people haven't read it, and not only have they read it, they haven't thought about it until its logical conclusion of those.
Right. So I think in conclusion, what we're saying in this particular segment of our podcast is that we are advocating for conversation.
Yes.
We're saying find a common ground with your neighbor,
Yep.
with that stranger, with that person that's on the bus beside you, or that person that you choose to engage with. Find some type of commonality. Then we're saying build upon that relationship till you get beyond that, you know, 0 to 20% of what you say they're going to believe.
Right.
Move that needle toward, you know, 50-50. At least they're going to believe half of what you say. Move that needle a little bit before you actually start engaging them in some of
But the
these.
only way that needle gets moved is if I prove to them, and I've experienced this myself when I was debating in college. I experienced it myself, is if I approached that opponent with the argument they normally use, right? If I say, well, I know that you believe X, Y, or Z, and this is the reasons you believe that. In a lot of ways, they became more accepting of the viewpoint I was about to give because they felt at that point, since I was repeating what they were going to say, they became more open to what I would also
Yeah, because they know
respond.
that you are not just blindly attacking them.
Exactly.
You've actually taken the time to understand
To
their
understand.
opinion,
Right.
so that you can say, "I understand your point of view. Let me point out the
The issues.
the issues with
Correct.
your point of view and the logical
Yeah.
conclusion with
Right.
what you're thinking."
Yeah.
So
And at that point, you're not compromising yourself at all. You're actually learning. And me being a Christian, the Bible never says don't learn, right? It says to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So there's a huge advocacy in the Bible for you to learn, for you to develop. And again, it helps you understand the other side so that you can do good.
yeah, so that you can begin to engage in conversation. You can begin by engaging in conversation, by being informed, well educated. You can begin to control the conversation. You can begin to make an impact in this socio-political environment. And
Facilitate change.
you can begin to facilitate change. I like that.
Thanks for listening to the Church and State Auxiliary. We hope you enjoyed the content in this podcast. If you did, give us a like, a follow, or subscribe. If you have questions, leave comments down below. Thanks again for listening.